Hi, everyone. Good evening from myself here, and good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. So we'll just give everyone about 30 seconds to join. And thank you so much for joining us for the webinar here. So just to give you a brief overview of the topic that we'll be covering today. So we have with us here Rajagopal Natarajan, or Raja for short. And Raja is the CEO of a company called Xook, which is a robotics company in the food and beverage space that has operations in both India and the US. So their R&D is located in India. The company is based out of the United States, and that's the first market that they're operating in. And we have a very exciting conversation in store over here for us today. So what we'll be covering is just to give you a brief overview of the agenda. Essentially, uh, personally, why I find this conversation very interesting is because Raja has a background where he's not just worked at hardware companies, but also software companies and started multiple companies of his own. And as such, one of the things that he's done is he's thought a lot like a software company when designing his hardware from day one itself. And I think that has extreme relevance to not just any startups that are joining us here today, but also larger companies, especially in the industrial space, where I think there's a lot to learn from what Xook is doing. So, a quick introduction to myself. My name is Anant. I work on the business development team at Excite. And for those of you who don't know, Excite, we are building a full stack device cloud. And what this does is it lets you connect your equipment or your devices to our software. And then from that, you can start building different recurring revenue streams. And Raja, who I've introduced a little bit, but I'll let him tell you more about himself and what exactly he's has worked on in the past. And then very quickly, we'll touch on what exactly Xook is.
Wonderful. Thanks, Anand. Thanks for inviting me to share our learnings through this journey. So I'm Raja. I have been in the consumer internet industry for most part of my career. Have worked with companies like Yahoo, Amazon, Zynga, Zynga when it was fairly a young company, and then a lot of other Indian startups from when they were young to the time they scaled up to become the leaders in their segment, such as Myntra, Ola, LiveSpace, and CureFit. While majority of my work has gone towards building consumer engagement and e-commerce experiences, the last two ventures that I've been building have been around have involved some level of hardware, and the current one is predominantly a hardware company. In my previous venture, I built out a fitness and wearable brand for the Indian market. And it involved building out a few fitness wearables and at-home workout devices, fitness devices like Peloton or let's say Tonal.
And you did that under CureFit, right?
Yeah, I
So
did that
that
under.
your previous company was acquired by CureFit, and then
Yeah, and then
right,
continued the journey as part
yeah,
of Cure. So spent
yeah.
a significant amount of time in Shenzhen learning the hardware side of things. It was one of the, let's say, most enticing kind of product to build, but at the same time, it also tests a lot of one's patience. So when I started this venture, Zook, a lot of the learnings from consumer internet industry, which moves at breakneck speed. In fact, I think most of you might have heard this statement from Mark Zuckerberg, where he says, "Break things, move fast." Right? That
Yes.
gave to Facebook. People kind of started moving really fast in the consumer internet industry in the last decade, from the time Facebook started setting that tone. And a similar thing has to happen for the hardware industry, and we've been doing our part in that journey, and I'll be happy to share more details as we move forward in this conversation.
Yeah, and actually, for those in our audience who don't know, so CureFit is probably, I think, the largest health and fitness company in India. And so,
Yeah, it is
where I met Raja, and so as Raja was saying over there, we met for the first time in Shenzhen. So I was working at a VC fund, that was investing in hardware companies, and then we'd help our portfolio companies manufacture out of Shenzhen. And then Raja had was visiting Shenzhen initially, and I think also lived there for quite some time in order to get these products built under the KyoFit banner. So definitely somebody that's seen manufacturing firsthand, as opposed to like sort of directing contract manufacturers from the sidelines. So Raja, you were telling us about Xook, and we have a video here as well that helps explain what exactly Xook is all about. So it's a robotics company in the food and beverage space. But I'd love to hear a little bit about what exactly led you to Xook. What were the problems that you saw in the market? And what exactly is Xook doing for your customers? What was that founding journey?
Yeah. So before I get started on where we started, I'll briefly introduce what Xook does, right? Xook is essentially a fully autonomous fresh food kiosk. You could think of it as, let's say, whatever Nespresso or Keurig machines did to coffee. You could now walk up to a machine, be it at your office pantry or in a public location, and press a button to get a freshly brewed cup of coffee. And this is possible 24/7, right? What we want to do is bring that level of convenience to access freshly made food 24/7. That's where we stand now. But the journey didn't start just from this, let's say, perspective. One of the observations that both I and my co-founder had, and which fascinated us about the food industry for applying robotics, is that when it comes to making interesting dishes, right? You need a chef who's creative to come up with a new dish or a new combination of, let's say, dishes. And then there is a repeatable element to cooking food at scale, which is generally handled by line cooks. And these are
Right.
people who might have limited experience in making food, and they would all want to become a chef someday. Or some people might just, let's say, be looking at it as a regular job in general, right? So the kind of task that one performs here is highly repeatable, and
Mm-hmm.
it involves a certain level of, let's say, understanding of food handling to be in place. So it requires a certain expertise, and it's also repeatable. That is where systems like, let's say, robotics and AI kick in and deliver the max value.
Right.
And I started building this product after observing how the food industry works.
Right.
Uh, we empower restaurant. As of now, we empower restaurant brands and food service partners, like, let's say, corporate catering companies, to operate 24/7, even in the absence of labor during certain shift hours. Like in the late night shifts, you don't have people available, but you still could
Right.
deliver convenience to people who are using such facilities. Be it an airport. How many times have you been to an airport post 10 p.m. and not found any restaurants open, right? So these
Yeah.
are kind of situations where Zip gives the maximum value. And while we are initially targeting such locations, there are a lot of different locations where this would start making sense. Like, let's say, offices with lower headcount that they cannot afford a cafeteria, or
Mm-hmm.
a budget hotel which cannot afford to run a restaurant. There are tons of use cases which we are going to go after. But net, we are unlocking revenue potential, additional revenue potential for players in the food servicing industry.
Right. So, and actually, I remember, when we first spoke about Zook, I think it was a year and a half ago, where one of the first hires you'd made was actually a chef,
Yep.
because you were first figuring out like that creative element of how exactly do dishes get made. And then after that, you can translate it to a repeatable process with robotics. And just so our audience understands clearly, so it's basically these companies that are operating locations, whether it's a restaurant, it's a cafeteria, could be at an airport, a hospital, a university, wherever it is. You're selling to them, but then there's also an end user element. So your customer and your end user are a little bit different.
That's right. Yeah. So we go into, let's say, contracts with food service partners
Right.
who in hundreds of locations at a shot. and at each of these hundreds of locations, we pretty much act like, let's say, Shopify for them to sell to their customers, and we
Right.
take care of all the shopping experience where they place an order, payments, and a variety of other things, including the
Right.
fulfillment. And that
Right.
fulfillment of the food is where a lot of the complexity comes in, and we started using Excite for.
Right. And so, like revenue potential for these customers is a big thing that you highlighted. And if this is a machine that has to be up and running at all times, right? We already saw there's a lot of complexity under the hood, because another thing I want to highlight is that you said it's ultimately your robotic systems are tasked with creating fresh food dishes. So it's not just simply a vending machine that's got things that are prepackaged and you're essentially just dispensing them. There's actually an element of cooking that takes place inside. And what the user gets is, or what the customer gets is a fresh bowl of pasta or of anything else that your restaurant partners want to create within this. And so, one of the things that I'm curious about, because especially with expensive machines, call them industrial if you will, one of the things that you always hear of is that you have these incredibly sophisticated machines that get put out into the market, but the way that they are tested is on the manufacturing line. So you test the limits in the manufacturing process, and then once the machine is put out there, very rarely are you getting data back from the machine that then lets you improve the product performance in the future, but then also provide the best possible proactive customer service and support when the machine is actually deployed. And so you're doing both. Like, you run those tests in the manufacturing process, but then there's that continuous element of gathering data once again. So can you just tell our viewers here a little bit about what exactly are these various subsystems that you're monitoring? And then what types of data do you gather?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about a product like Xook, so we are essentially a live food counter which makes and serves fresh food. And this, just to make sure that you understand the kind of fresh food we are talking about, we're talking about anything that goes in a bowl. Think of
Mm-hmm.
salads, potato bowls, Mediterranean bowls, pastas,
Mm-hmm.
or a variety of other snack dishes, right? So a lot of dishes can be made by just putting together a few ingredients, heating as required, and presenting them in a beautiful format. You would see this with a lot of brands like, let's say, Chipotle, Panera Bread,
Mm-hmm.
Subway, and many of other players out there in the market. If you walk into any of these stores, what you would notice is that there are a lot of ingredients kept in canisters, kept in GN pans. And you walk up there and place an order. Someone walks through each of these GN pans, asks you if you want that ingredient, puts it in your bowl. If, let's say, cheese needs to be melted, they put it in an oven and then take it out
Mm-hmm.
and gives it to you at the end of the
Right.
separation. So we pretty much have automated this entire flow. Think about the kind of operations that go in here. Each ingredient is very different and they need to be handled with care. Some could be delicate, and all of these need to be handled in a food safe way. So we
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of canisters that house these ingredients and know how to dispense the ingredients. So that goes at the top of the machine. The yellow area where you see Xook written in bold,
Right.
where all the
Right.
canisters. And then the glass view pane that you see over there is where the actual preparation happens. A robotic system runs there, doing whatever this person would do to prepare your bowl of, let's say, salad or burrito bowl.
Mm-hmm.
And the food finally comes up. So here, to make a typical bowl, tens of systems interact with each other. Sometimes they need to coordinate with each other for the bowl to come
Mm-hmm.
out beautifully. For example, garnishing, right?
Right.
The robotic system needs to move while the dispenser is dispensing at a certain rate. A lot of
Right.
this must be well coordinated for the machine to work well.
Yeah.
So that's essentially for you to have an understanding of the kind of, let's say, sophistication that goes into a machine like this.
Right.
Coming back to how data plays a critical role. and how we try to do things slightly different from non-traditional industry. Um, we've kept, so if you think about the different layers in a product like this, there is the hardware layer, which you cannot
Mm-hmm.
change that easily. If let's say I have to change a hardware component, I have to maybe go to the machine physically, take the component out and put in a newer generation of the component. If at all they were backward compatible, and in most cases they won't be. So hardware layer needs to be tested thoroughly, and you want to be sure that that doesn't require change as frequently. And then you have the firmware layer, which is where all the intelligence comes in. Like I spoke about the coordination or a variety of other things. All this intelligence comes into your firmware layer, and this can be changed. And you would see this in the products you've been using in recent days, be it your
Mm-hmm.
smart TV, be it your watch, even a very rudimentary fitness band, or even your car, right? They get something that is called OTA, over the update, and suddenly the software there changes, and the capabilities, newer capabilities get unlocked on the same hardware that you've been using all along. So that
Mm-hmm.
is the second layer, which is firmware. And the software layer is something that we are used to seeing moving really fast.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of logic going in the cloud. So we try to keep uh, the most rudimentary operations at the hardware level and move everything up the stack. At the software
Right.
stack, excellent analytics products like Google Analytics, Mixpanel, and a variety of other tools, and a lot of A/B testing tools, which let you
Mm-hmm.
gather data about how your product is being used, your software product is being used, and you could make iterations super fast and even roll out one new, let's say, release every single day. A
Right.
lot of gaming companies do release every single day. Right? And coming to firmware side, you could push out updates as frequently as you want. But
Mm-hmm.
again, some of these updates need to be rolled out cautiously because they could break the system, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here you need all the more data than in the software layer to be confident about your decisions. But
Mm-hmm.
interestingly, the market has very few offerings which let you gather that data.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't want to build all this infrastructure to gather the data ourselves. And we started looking for tools where, let's say, we could make use of this. And that's where we started working with Excite. But keeping that aside, essentially, you need a stack that's very similar to Google Analytics and Mixpanel on the
Right.
firmware side to be able to
Right.
make confidently.
Right. Yeah, and that's an interesting point, like because maybe one of the reasons that that type of data gathering post deployment doesn't really take place, like automotive is one industry where I can think it does happen. But I guess like the reason why it's not as common as in the software world is because A, it's more difficult to achieve. And then B, it's also just not part of the core competency or the DNA of a lot of these companies. Because so far, like, you've been used to essentially building the best in class hardware, but then software gets forgotten. But now we've reached this place where, a lot of these products are operating with the fusion of hardware and software. And that then needs either new tools or new competencies for these companies to have. So,
There is, in fact, one another thing there is
right.
you pointed out that it's a mindset. If a
Yeah.
company is making money by releasing a new version of the hardware, there is less incentive in updating the product's capability using software.
Right.
There are a few companies whose business model hinges around continuously delivering better experiences, and those
Right.
companies would be keen to understand how to elevate the experience of their customers on a continual basis
Right.
and start utilizing these kind of infrastructure services.
Right. Right. And Tesla is a very good example of that with like a very complicated product. Apple with the phones, or like a lot of these smartphone manufacturers these days. So just coming back to Zook again, Raja, for a second. So two things that you highlighted in your previous response. One was the visual presentation of the food. The second was food safety. I imagine a third is also taste, right? Because like you mentioned, the dispensing, the rate at which it takes place, the location on that bowl where it takes place, these could feasibly affect taste as well. So I'd like to understand, like one would be at this general level of these three buckets that I've just outlined over here from your response. And then a level below that, can you also explain like maybe some specific examples of what exactly you have to monitor from these subsystems that you have within the machine? And then how does it affect one or all three of these different buckets that you're looking to monitor your data for?
Yeah. So at a high level, there are a few diverse use cases that we use telemetrics for. Right? One is around improving the product itself continuously. Second is around monitoring and having, let's say, a fair grasp of what is going wrong and be able to respond pretty quickly. And the
Hmm.
third is around the area that we just discussed a while back, which is continuous development and improvement, right?
Right.
So the consumer for the first part, which is, let's say, food safety and general, let's say, operational health, is going to be operations and service teams. And the second part is something that the engineering team and the product team consumes. So we have a broad set of things being monitored on a regular basis. We want to be sure that the ingredients that are kept inside the machine are safe to consume at every point in time. So
Hmm.
continually monitor temperatures of different ingredients and different zones within the machine. And this data gives us confidence that a product is good to be served to consumers without causing any food safety issues.
Hmm.
So sometimes, so we also have use cases where we lock the machine if the temperature is out of the safety zone for more than a certain amount of time. And all of
Hmm.
these ensure that we could be HACCP compliant automatically, right? So that's one very key aspect. The second aspect is around monitoring errors, anomalies, and other key information about what's going on within the machine. So sometimes there could be a failure and you want to know what failed, kind of
Hmm.
like, let's say, the reasons you use Sentry in the web world, right?
Hmm.
And the second set of things could be that things are not going as expected, but you still want to notify someone so that they look at it and see if it could be the tip of an
Hmm.
iceberg. So anomalies, reporting anomalies. And then
Hmm.
you also have a lot of other general analytical data, like let's say we asked this dispenser to dispense, let's say 7 grams of protein. Did it
Hmm.
end up dispensing 7, 7.5, or 8? Was it within the range, right?
Hmm.
So things like these help us analyze accuracy and other passive data points, which would help us deliver a better product and better experience.
Right.
Apart from this, there are also a few other use cases which go on the broader consumer experience side. So let's say a consumer ordered a certain dish and the dish couldn't be fulfilled. There's an error. There are multiple things you could do with this. One, you send this error to a person who would probably need to figure out why it went wrong and fix it, right? That's
Hmm.
one part of it. But the customer experience hasn't been addressed. This should also go to a ticketing system, and the customer should be proactively contacted. Why should a
Hmm.
customer reach out to a customer care, give us information, say what went wrong from his end, then we respond back with the resolution. We should ideally, with the fact that we know something is wrong, come up with a
Hmm.
resolution
Hmm.
instantaneously. So these are some of the use cases that we broadly focus on.
Right. Very nice. And also another thing that just occurred to me, very interesting from everything that you just said, is coming back to like this earlier point where all of this started from, right? Like where hardware is typically built with testing done at the manufacturing phase. And then that lets you understand when a failure might happen, right? And you can obviously understand what the failure is. So, for example, like you have a laser cutting machine, there's a particular belt that can do 3,000 cycles. It's worn out after that. But let's say it happened like 3,000 is the upper limit, but for some reason it happened at about 2,500. You can understand that that failure happened 500 cycles prior, but you'll never really have an understanding as to why without gathering some of the data associated with that event. right? And like also with any future improvements that you make to this machine, it's not just the historical logs that you're looking at, but also the context around the data, which then gives you that why.
Yeah, absolutely. So you notice that, let's say, torque went up just before it got cut. It's probably to do with something that's jamming it or some motor that didn't work, right? So
Right.
the associated data points and having all this data instantaneously to be able to correlate and try to figure out what went wrong is pretty much gold. You don't want to be digging into a log and pulling things out at that time. You want to be in a position where you could just open up a dashboard, compare a couple of what do
Right.
you call graphs or tables to make the decision.
Right. And with that being said, one thing I'm very keen to understand is generally your decision-making process around, okay, you have this complex product, you're a startup, you have a finite amount of resources. How do you evaluate what is absolutely critical for you to build versus things that you're fine with, purchasing a solution for?
Yeah. Uh, I think it's the standard core versus non-core that it boils down to. So our
Mm-hmm.
core for this particular product is about understanding the workflow requirements for our clients who are the food service providers and making
Mm-hmm.
sure that their workflow requirements, their safety concerns, and every aspect that would let them operate. So if, let's say, someone is operating 200 locations today, how do we let
Mm-hmm.
them 2,000 locations with us without thinking twice? What kind of workflows are needed? What kind of, let's say, dashboards are needed? And what kind of, what do you call, other operational aspects need to be stopped? That's core to us.
Mm-hmm.
For the consumer, delivering the quality of food that they get from the best restaurants consistently and reliably, that's going to be the key value proposition. So
Mm-hmm.
every effort that we put in-house has to be focused on either of these buckets. Anything outside of that, or anything that's not going to create, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
quality for us, should be purchased from the market if available in the right quality. If it's not available,
Right.
then story, right? But
Right.
in fact, my co-founder, who heads product and technology, Ratul,
Mm-hmm.
is one of the largest telematic systems, I would say, across the world. He
Yeah.
built for Ola, which is the largest cab aggregator in India, and
Right.
arguably the one of the top five across the world in terms of volume.
Yeah.
And
Definitely.
while he's built that system, building such a system, maintaining it, and ensuring that the infrastructure never
Mm-hmm.
fails, because when your machine fails, you are going to look at this data and what if the data infrastructure has failed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you want to be sure that these systems get tier one attention,
Mm-hmm.
and to be able to give that the tier one attention is very hard for a startup in terms of resourcing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not
Mm-hmm.
worthwhile. And we wanted to use a product from a company which gives which for whom this is bread and butter, and this would be given the tier one attention in terms of, let's
Right.
say, time and other aspects. And
Right.
even think about, let's say, all the other things that could go wrong at a site. A lot of times in places where we deploy, there could be intermittent connection losses, or there could be a few other things that go wrong, and we don't want to be worrying about how to store the data, when to transmit it back to the servers, etc., just to get the data across. And that's primarily the reason we looked outside for the telematics use cases.
Right. And when I have this conversation with other manufacturers, like that point that you brought up about core IP versus things that are non-core won't really contribute to IP, like it's not really what, is unique about Xook. One of the things that once came up is that the system that you use to gather data, as long as it's working at a certain fidelity, it's reliable, that really isn't your unique value add. It's what you then do with that data in terms of customer experience, product improvements, and so on. That is really what contributes to core IP. Would you Would you say that's a fair assessment?
No, absolutely. I would 100% agree with that. It's as I said, all the things that we do in terms of unlocking customer experience by
Hmm.
having close to proactively reach out to a customer who had a bad experience. And this came
Right,
up a few of our customer interviews as well, where they were excited to see that with a DoorDash or a Swiggy, they have to reach out and claim a refund when their order doesn't get delivered, but refunds
right,
happen. So those are
right.
power, the kind of powers that a product like Xook could unlock, where
Hmm.
we are the ordering platform, we are the fulfillment platform, which makes food for them, and
Right,
being using that integrated experience, we could ideally elevate experiences on certain fronts. We
right,
should be worrying about how to get the right data, the right time to be able to unlock such experiences. As long as it
right,
comes, it empowers us 10 times more.
right. Absolutely. And with that being said, right, like that point that you brought up about customer experience. So a lot of customer experience, like people, especially in your case, right, where you have the end user experience that, okay, my order didn't go through, it automatically got refunded, or that the machine got shut down because it saw like a health and safety consideration that's being violated. So that is things that the end consumer is exposed to. But for large machines, especially, like people don't often think about customer experience. Although I am starting to see this change in the industrial space, which is amazing, where a lot of these companies will have this unified customer dashboard, which really is designed to answer that question of where do I go if I need X? Where do I go if I have a problem with configuring my machine? Where do I go if I have to upgrade my warranty? Where do I go if I have to purchase a spare part? Where do I go for a billing issue? Or where do I simply go if I have to speak to someone? And how do you think about that customer experience? Because ultimately, like you want to give your customer one of these machines to install at their location, and then they shouldn't really have to worry about the things that come with its upkeep, right? And so that all encompassing nature of giving them a product, but then also peace of mind along with it. How do you think about that?
Right. So we enhance the revenue potential for these customers, and that's the value prop that they've bought into. Given that it translates to two things. One, there should be minimal downtime for the machine. If something goes wrong, we should be able to recover quickly, ideally remotely, right? And
Hmm.
sometimes one has to go to the site and get it up and running once again. So any initiative that brings down the downtime is going to result in higher customer experience for our clients who pretty much hired this machine for enhancing the revenue potential. Nobody
Hmm.
wants an employee who's taking a lot of breaks, and so is this machine for them, right? And the second aspect is around making sure that we understand the kind of, let's say, opportunities for them to make additional revenue and unlock. Second part
Hmm.
goes into mostly, let's say, the software side of things, where we could iterate fast and do things. On the hardware side of things, how do you minimize the downtime, right? So first thing, uh, in a typical scenario, when something goes down in an industrial setup or in any other, let's say, hardware connected hardware setup, someone has to rush into the site. They do a, let's say, first touch point to see what went wrong. They do a diagnosis. They might have a flow
Hmm.
chart, a diagnosis, and then say, hey, here is what has gone wrong. I need
Hmm.
to say bring a spare part for X, spare part for Y, it goes out, comes back, replaces it, or needs some additional knowledge to be able to work on that condition.
Hmm.
Contact the technical team. The technical team analyzes the data points and gives all this. The next steps, suggest the next steps, right? You want this entire cycle to happen in the shortest time possible, which is possible if, let's say, both the frontline team and the backend tech team who's supposed to
Hmm.
support them have the same level of information about what went wrong. A lot of times they don't, the backend team doesn't have to respond, but
Right.
having that information readily at hand helps. The frontline team, even before they go to the site, should know what went wrong. and anticipate
Exactly.
what they carry and take them along. All of this would make sure that resolutions at the first touch point happen in more percentage of cases, right? That elevates the customer experience for any client who's getting these machines. So
Right.
that's one key aspect which you could unlock with a lot of data. And the second aspect about the backend team having enough context becomes all the more pronounced in cases like ours, where
Right.
we are a distributed team and you don't want there to be any gaps in information that the two teams have, right? And this would be true with any company that's at scale. So right now, while we are geographically distributed, but operating in lesser number of locations, being the stage we are in, a large as we grow bigger at scale, there's always going to be this information gap. Bridging that information gap is a very critical element in getting elevated customer support.
Right. And the final thing that I want to finish off with before we dive into the Q&A portion is how are you using Excite right now? So for our users, or sorry, for our viewers who don't know, you are in the pilot stage right now. You have customers lined up already who you'll be expanding with very, very shortly. So how are you using Excite at the moment? What are the features that you're really getting started with? And then what are your plans for the future once you scale? And once you get out of that, especially that WhatsApp stage that startups usually begin with, where they're keeping very tight feedback loops with their customers. And then ultimately this all has to exist as a large professional, often decentralized operation. So what do you think that journey looks like for you on Excite in particular?
Right. So at the moment, we use Excite primarily for telematics use cases to monitor different, let's say, component, subcomponent level parameters and have enough information at hand, create dashboards and keep them all ready to be able to act on any failures and also act on opportunities for improving the product. Right. So that's the broader use case that we are currently using Excite for. The one thing that's currently under works and we should have it up and running ideally would be to also pass a lot of these errors to our ticketing system so that we do. So right now, our engineering team, product team, customer support, everything is kind of like one small team. As we expand
Mm,
further, a lot of these resolutions have to go through a ticketing system. So we are one of the midterm use cases would be to integrate it to a ticketing system so that resolutions can be taken up proactively, right? And going further down, right now, since we have, let's say, a handful of large contracts which we have to bill, it's fairly easy to do things offline. But as we
mhm.
go to, as the number of customers that we interface with increase, subscription management is one thing that we look at using Excite for. And if the plan is to list all the different, let's say, available leasing options and revenue sharing options and take care of so that we don't have to focus on collections, accounts receivables, etc. Going forward,
Right.
everything has come through system. That's one another thing that's planned in the long term. But would also
Right.
love to see some use cases around
Think that Raj- Oh,
surveys.
sorry.
Yeah, would
Sorry,
also
I apologize. There was a lag in the audio. Carry on.
Yeah, would also love to see how Excite could help us with, let's say, getting a pulse of the customers. Could we do surveys and get their feedback? Could those again come through the same platform? Thinking about, let's say, the broader use cases you're unlocking for us. But otherwise, these are the things in our roadmap.
Right. And so everything that Raja just spoke about, if I guess had to divide it into a few buckets. So the first is using it as an internal data gathering and machine management and monitoring tool. The second is that element of customer support, whether that's through incident tracking, tickets, sending out ticket requests to service agents, what have you. There's that customer support portion of it. And then lastly, there's the commerce portion of it, which will ultimately go into billing and making sure that coming back to that idea that customers have this unified portal where they can log into and like carry out any of the actions associated with their purchase of Xook, whether that's reaching out for support, whether that's any of their billing requirements, what have you. And then ultimately, when you are in a situation where you have external service teams or you have various types of partners, they can all be a part of the platform as well. So with that being said, if you found this discussion interesting, if there's anything you would like to learn more about Excite, uh, please do feel free to get in touch. So the way that we typically work is we'll first identify a use case with you to truly understand your business, and then we undergo a consultative process where we will see how exactly you can make use of Excite. If you'd like to initiate a pilot with us, we can work that out. And then ultimately, we keep iterating on that till you're ready for launch. And this process we've seen is anywhere from a month to a few months' time, where our customers are ready to really roll out the technology. And so, with all of that being said, let's get into some questions from the audience. So if anybody has questions for Raja, for myself, you can put them in the Q&A box and we'll be monitoring them. Okay, so Raja, one question that we do have over here is, and it's pretty open-ended, so I think you can answer this in a few different ways, is what advice would you have for hardware companies to think more like software companies?
Right. So I think I covered a certain part of it in the initial conversation. Um, Hardware is something that cannot be changed that often, that easily. At least the mechanical and electronic components cannot be changed that easily. But every other logic that goes into it, your embedded software, firmware, software systems can be updated pretty fast. The most important things to take care of to be able to move fast is to move fast and confidently about every decision that you make is to have enough data at hand and also have a good OTA and CA/CD platform to continuous integration and continuous development deployment platform to be able to roll out these changes on a very regular basis. And taking a step back, this is all about execution, right? Taking a step back.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that generally software companies do is they follow agile methodology around even go to market. While hardware
Mm-hmm.
companies think long and hard about making go to market bets, they identify a GTM and it has to be frozen in stone. Then you build a product for that particular channel customer segment, and then you launch it big bang in the market with a lot of units. It need not be so in the current world where you could, if at all, let's say the mechanical operations that you have to do or the basic electronic components, sensors and other things that you need for fulfilling a wider set of use cases are going to be constant. So you could still
Mm-hmm.
build a product that is kind of a MVP on the use cases front, but on the hardware front, you have all the basic capabilities covered. Now it's about how to use these capabilities, right? How do I use, let's say, a suction and vision to make a better vacuum cleaner that navigates on its own? Can
Right.
I use algorithm X versus algorithm Y? Can I overcome obstacles? Can I overcome, let's say, staircases? Those are things that people could think subsequently, right? After getting the product out. You could come up with different use cases depending on which customers give the most pull.
Mm-hmm.
So have optionalities in GTM, just like a
Mm-hmm.
software company would do, by
Mm-hmm.
building the core hardware elements and taking that to market with the MVP of software elements and
Right.
having a thorough infrastructure to observe what is going on the ground and iterate really fast. Thorough
Right.
infrastructure to react fast would involve a good analytics platform and a good product update rollout platform.
Right. And one question that I actually have on this, because I hear it from some manufacturers that I speak with who are like have these legacy machines, designs are locked in, and they're trying to upgrade, but really like the first thing that they have to do is make their machines IoT enabled, right? So that they're getting that data back in real time or near real time. Whereas right now that, they have a black box that like once a service agent goes on site might be able to plug into and they're getting this data back, but it doesn't really make like all of the advantages that you spoke about, right? In terms of proactive maintenance that we spoke about, or like even like the higher level stuff around, like developing that core DNA and process of thinking around, okay, like how exactly do I keep evolving? How do I change my GTM? And so that foundation that you were talking about, right, where ultimately they have like the building blocks in place. I see some manufacturers who don't even know how to get started with that, right? Like, okay, how do I make my machine IoT enabled? So for somebody that's done that with an expensive piece of equipment and has done that on a very shoestring budget, what would be your advice to companies to get started on, undergoing this IoT enablement journey before all of the other stuff even comes up?
Right. So I think it's about it's just getting the basics right. If you make the decision that I want to have make my product IoT enabled, there should
Mm,
be mechanisms to gather data from different subcomponents, right? So sometimes you might want to let the subcomponents communicate to your cloud, and sometimes you don't
mm,
want to. You want to have, let's say, one gateway through which everything communicates. So building that gateway for gathering all the data at one place,
mm,
then being able to reliably push it through whatever connectivity you have, understanding the connectivity's limitations and other things, and being sure that this data is going to reach my servers at the right time. That's the second part
right.
of. And then the third part is a good reporting system where which lets you ask the right questions and
Mm,
just piece together all this data and present at least, let's say, parts of the answers, right?
right.
So that's pretty much what one should ideally focus on. And I think that's table stakes for anyone who's bringing in a software layer onto any platform, be it hardware, be it so.
Right. So, like, really just commit to it. Once you made that decision, the other things are actually much easier to put into place. Because I
Right. All
think,
you have
like,
to do is go figure out which platforms to use to
yeah,
uh, fill the needs of each of these layers. You know the layers.
yeah,
All you need
yeah,
to look for is products that fill those layers and
yeah.
adopt on those products and go live with it.
And I think that's a very good point because I feel like when people think of, making their products IoT enabled, they think about everything end to end, right? They don't think about, okay, this is step one. And then step two, there might actually be tools already out there that I can leverage, right? But
Right.
in terms of putting sensors into my design and like monitoring that information, that is the foundational element that I have to look after. The other things can follow, and it's actually the implementation and the paths to getting there is much simpler than people might
As a
think.
hardware manufacturer, the most control you have is around choosing the right sensors, the right
Right,
connectivity strategies. What are you going to use, Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or 5G, right? And
right,
once these building blocks are in place, and what kind of processors you're going to use. Does it have the ability to gather data? Does it have support for storage to store the data till connectivity comes back? These are the ground level decisions. And then there are hundreds of, let's say, ways you could build that. You could use open source products and build a full stack out if you have the capability and the time to invest, money to invest, or adopt a product much like we did with Excite to go live with something off the shelf.
right.
Or there are also other, let's say, enterprise solutions available out there if the use cases are slightly different and more complex.
Amazing. Raja, thank you so much. This has been extremely insightful. And for those who are not able to join us, we have our emails available over here. If you would like to reach out to me to learn more about Excite, please feel free to do so. If you'd like to reach out to Raja, uh, just to chat about any of the topics that he discussed, or on the off chance that you're looking to install Xook at your office location, you can get in touch with him. And for those who are not able to join us, we'll also be sending out the slides and a recording of this webinar. And snippets from it will also be shared on LinkedIn in due course. So thank you so much for being with us here, and we will see you next time. Bye bye.
Thank you. See you.